So my name is Devrat Das. I'll take your English for BA courses, and I'll take your module number. Course code is ENB 1111. Okay. So the name of the module is History of English Literature. So before every class, I do a recap of last class, and at the end of every class, I tell what I will teach in next class. Okay. So this is something that we have discussed in last class. It was our first block, and we had these units: origin of medieval literature, the Renaissance, Reformation, Enlightenment in England, Romanticism to Victorian era. So these were the blocks, and we'll go from sorry no, actually these were the blocks. These were the four blocks. Okay, here I had written units, so this is something I'll change later on. Okay, so yeah, I had discussed about the methods, how I will approach this topic and how we will study. And when we talk about a history of English literature, we don't just go like a history class, because it's not an out and out history class. It's a English literature class. So we'll approach history of England through the literature of English. How will you do it? So every work of literature has been created or has been written in the backdrop of a social and political economic structure that was there. Like I had given an example of Padmavat, the movie as well. You see, if you have seen that movie Padmavat, or we can take any other example. Let's say there is a film called Gladiator, uh, starring Russell Crowe. Okay, he had won a Oscar movie for that. So it was set in Roman time, and during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. So what happens is, we take up the historical background, we take the political background of that situation, what was happening during that time, the treachery by Aurelius's son, all those things we see in that movie. So what we do in literature is we take up the historical background to understand the text of that time. Okay, so let's say, you will even see, feminist writings of 17th century, let's say. Okay, those are very much simple, and you might say, okay, anyone could write a piece of literature like this. Means, what makes it great? What makes Pride and Prejudice great? So you will see that, there is a point of choice for the woman in Pride and Prejudice. Okay, so it was written during those times when women had no choice. Rather, the society or the family used to choose things for the women. Okay, they had no choice. They had no voting rights. In fact, the suffrage movement or the voting rights for women came much later. And one of these players we can see during the Russian Revolution. We read the sociological, political background of each timing to understand the setting of the piece of literature. Let's say whether it is a piece of poetry, whether it is a piece of novel, whether it is a piece of, let's say, even we see the journalism writings of 17th 18th century, let's say, of Richard Steele, or some or the other one. Okay, I'm forgetting his name, whatever. So those people written in those backgrounds, talking about the most, crucial times, crucial moment in history. Okay. Their social conflicts, their political conflicts of those times can be studied through those cultural texts. So, moving on. So these are something I had discussed in the previous class. Then again, with the advent of an invasion of a new set of people in a land, how the literature changes. Like I had given example of Urdu poetry, and the fusion of Urdu words in English, in Hindi language, or say after the English colonialism, the fusion of English in Hindi language. Much informally, the people of Bombay, or let's say the metropolitan people mostly, or let's say Delhi, they had fused the Hindi and English, and how they had made a new informal language, which is not a formal. We call it English. They fused Hindi and English together and talk. So they call it English. Okay, so how that's how language changes, vocabulary changes, even cuisine also changes. If you see, in the mainland of India, there was no concept of some Afghani dishes like Afghani chicken, or other things like kebabs and all. These things came from Persia with Persian invasion, or say during the Sultanate times of India. Okay, these things got introduced in India. Let's say when Nizams of Hyderabad, a very different cuisine style, eating habits from the mainland Indian. So these things gets introduced within each invasion. So in England as well, okay, there were many advances by the Saxon tribe. Saxon tribe lived around the places of current Germany. So with those things, the language changed, the cuisine changed to English. The language English has also evolved throughout time. So this was the main topic. So I have talked about many periods here: Anglo-Saxon period, on and with the advent of Norman invasion, and we I particularly talked about a piece of literature called Beowulf, and Beowulf having some features of Christians and heroic features of pagans. Pagans are the non-Christians. So I have descriptively talked about these things in my last class, and the importance of supernatural power, and religion, all those things, So moving on. So today we'll talk about another slide, another block. So I'm sharing my screen. Can you guys see my screen? Can you guys see my screen? Mr. Malsum, can you see my screen? You can unmute yourself and say. Can you see the new slide?
No, sir, I can't.
You can't.
No.
I have just shared a new slide.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah. I can see
yeah,
that.
yeah. So this
Yes.
is this is
It's
the
that's
slide.
nice.
So today we'll take block number 3. That is your the enlightenment and rise of the novel, and we'll talk about enlightenment as a movement, and we'll talk about how science has a role in it, and how science has evolved with time. People like John Locke and all came with their theories of empiricism, and then there was an advent of scientific uh, thinking in those times. So when we talk about enlightenment, we are talking about a time in the history of United Kingdom. There was out and out very much of a religious conflict. There was a conflict between the Parliament of England and the monarchy. Okay, and if I'm not wrong, there it was the reign of King Charles the One. Okay, and there were, as you know, if you are Christians, if you are familiar with Christianity, or if your friends are Christian, there are sects of Christian like the Baptists, the Catholics, all those things. So in those time, uh, a new flare, a new movement had occurred. The sharing of about for the sharing of power between the parliament and between the kings of that time. And then we also see that there was an advance of scientific thinking in those times. And particularly I want to draw your attention to uh, a certain topic that science didn't just pop up like that without any struggle. Scientific thinking, rationality had to come across time while fighting with the society and the religious sentiments of those times. If you remember the case of Galileo Galilei, the scientist, he was imprisoned, and later on he became blind, I think. So he was the one who had invented the telescope, if I'm not wrong. So he was the one of the first persons to say that the planets like Earth evolves around the sun. Okay. uh, Earlier than that, the belief was different, you know and there was, like, about the creation, about, means, human creation or the creation on earth. There were different religious theories. Even the Christian textbook says, like, there is one this thing. There were many, I suppose there are multiple copies of Bible throughout the time. And they talk about the creation of life, okay, in different ways. Some say it came from the clay. And in one way, if I'm not wrong, it says, like, women came from the broken rib of men. Okay. So all those things are there. So yes, what I wanted to say is, science had to fight a long way to come into existence. And there were even biologists too, later on, who came, who was more prominent, and who talked about the theories of origin. Charles Darwin, I'm talking about Charles Darwin. Okay, so he has this famous book, I think, Theories of Origin, something like that. So yeah, so advent of science happened during those times. So when you see in that setting, the fight between parliament and monarchy, there is a rise of democratic ideas in those times as well. And then a little flares you can see. And then later on, it took up a fold. And then the what to say, um, when the French feudals were thrown during the French Balthasar or July Revolution, 1798, like that, or 89. Okay, during those times. Okay, freedom of speech, a new thinking, the importance of common man, that has come up during those later, with those times, with that was the beginning of those thinking. And later on, it went to French Revolution in Europe. So things like that, you know So rise of nobility we'll talk about. You have heard about Gutenberg, and the invention of printing press. So with these things, actually, the newspapers you read today, okay, the common man who has access to education has come from a mass printing press, invention of mass printing press. Otherwise, the study was an affair of the creamy layers of the nobles of society, right? Noblemen. And it's not just the stereotypical sentiment or exclusion from upper caste and lower caste. It was that there were not enough these things, materials available to all for study as well. So there is another sentiment like that. So obviously people who had access to those things were people who had money, people who had capital, people who had power. Okay, so let's proceed to next slides. So this thing we'll see in this slide: 17th to 18th century English literature, age of reason, rational thinking. Literature reflects social and intellectual change, as I have told you earlier in my last class as well. How the political revolutions, how the social revolution, how this changes in society, changes has an intellectual shift and a shift of thinking that can be seen through literature as well. Okay. So this is post Civil War England, as I said, the Parliament and the monarchy, and then scientific and political progress. I have already discussed rise of middle class readers. How with the advent of printing press, mass media printing, so those things, and growth of print culture. I have already discussed. Age of reason, all those things we'll see. The enlightenment in the enlightenment of England, rejection of superstition. If you are bringing up science, obviously the superstitious belief that had persisted for centuries and thousands of years, not just centuries. Okay, so that whenever there is a change, big change, like there was a time of barbarism in the world. Then there came feudalism. At the peak of feudalism, no one thought that else will come. But no, after French Revolution, which is like in fact one of the first and foremost uh, revolution done by commoners in the world for the sake of commoners' good. So that had come up. So through industrialization, urbanization also happened, and with urbanization and industrialization, we've come to capitalism. So these things keeps on changing throughout time, throughout with the scientific um interest and people's interest. At best, the society changes. Faith in human reason. What is human reason? And again, it's scientific inquiry, progress and reform. Obviously, if you are breaking stereotypes that has been there for thousands of years, so there will be a sentiment of reform. Okay, education and knowledge. Okay, now people think more empirically. People see the reason behind things, and people don't just ask what, they say how and why. So that's how things have changed. Moral philosophy. Okay, Locke, as I said, he talked about empiricism. Empiricism, like it's a study of reason and seeing things, then examining, observing, and then uh, uh, coming to conclusion of things, so like that. Then we also I've also talked about the advance of science, calculus, and then laws of physics by Sir Isaac Newton, who had lived around those times, I believe 18th century. Okay, let me be sure again. Yeah, I'm right. 17th century, and influence on writers. These things had influenced writers, of course. Rational outlook in literature. But again, with the progress, if you go in the Romantic period, you'll see poets like William Wordsworth and William Blake. So there is a contrast between William Wordsworth and William Blake. This was a time of industrial revolution. This was a time of rapid urbanization. So during those time, there is a river in England. It is called Thames. Like we have the Ganges, and we see Ganges as the holy river. We Hindus see Ganges as the holy river. Also, the Thames in England is considered to be holy, and somewhere somewhere people of the English people has some sentiment, or their life importance has been connected to the river things, because each rivers are called the lifelines of civilization. Every type of civilization that have existed from the, let's say, Mesopotamian time, or like our Harappan civilization, all had uh, uh, they had settlements around river, because that was the source of fresh water. And there was a source of food supplements as well. Okay, so these things, and those places around rivers are good for agricultural practices as well. So rivers had a important important place in history throughout civilization. Okay, so these things. And so what Blake wrote about the river Thames is, during industrial revolution, the color of the river Thames had turned to black because of the industrial waste discharge. And he actually saw it like a realist, and he talked about the grotesque position of England at time. There was thefts, there were obviously worker revolution, all those things were there. The hooliganism that was happening at that time, all those things he talked about like a realist. On the other side, if you see a romantic poet like William Wordsworth, he talked about beauty and nature. So he wanted to bring people's attention to the beauty of nature, and from the backdrop of, sometimes you see a progress happening, like a development or industrialization, but it might not always be a progress, rather a regress for human life there, the quality of life in people. So all those things. Moving on. So, Charles the Two, 1660, we're talking about restoration, reaction against Puritanism, emphasis on wit and realism, all those things I have discussed. Features of restoration, comedy of manners, satire, and social criticism. We study about. Once again, I have to admit, a student. Around these times, there were writers like Alexander Pope, and they did write about the societies, the Polish societies. So there always emerges a creamy layer of society in every throughout time. So so certain group of people, they used to stay in a manner, very much polished, very much, which is not realistic, or let's say much glittering, or what they used to stay in, with a lot of makeup and all. You have seen Englishmen, with their caps and with their curly hair, and even man used to put these things, makeups and lipsticks as well. So, uh, in those backdrop, there were writers who mocked about those times, and people, who lived their life much superficially and away from the realistic, life. Okay, so this thing he has talked about. The Pope's famous work is the Rape of the Lock. So I'll talk about Rape of the Lock in my next class. Even I have a MA class. So when you get into MA class, I'll in an elaboration we'll talk about the prose and poetries of those times. So major restoration poet writers here, they have given example of John Dryden, William Wycherley, and then Afra Ben. Afra Ben is considered one of the first feminist writers. Uh, those things, and I've talked about feminism, and I have given example of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice as well. So yeah, rise of professional authorship, rise of prose fiction. So this in during this time, birth of the English novel, they say, novels, this used to come in parts. Like you might have seen many magazines, in our childhood they used to release. Still, I don't know whether these magazines are still there or not. So they used to release as a novel or novella, in parts, in small stories. Okay, each of their uh, what does it say, addition. Okay, little by little, like even in there is a section in newspapers, which follows this kind of things. So this has come from those times. So this had started when there was a rise of uh, a printing press, and circulation of journalistic papers, and then literary works, for say, because there was an ample amount of source to get circulated among a large population at that time. So novel, the birth of the novel is a long form of uh, literary literature, right? Like uh, a novel would be like almost 50,000 words long, and there were novels which are like 500, 600 pages, uh, which will be like 2,000 words and stuff, 20, sorry, 2 lakh words and stuff. Okay, so like Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, or say Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, or say like the Glass Palace by Amitabh Ghosh, or let's say many books are there. Okay, the Bikram, this one, the Suitable Boy, all those things. Midnight Children by Salman Rushdie. Many long form of novels. There are short novels or novellas like The Great Gatsby by this author, and then many I can go on and on. There was a famous work by our Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. You might have read in your school times, or maybe later on as well, uh, by Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. So it was a simple story about a fisherman, old fisherman, and his zeal to uh, succeed in his job. So that was the thing. So things like that. This is an example of novel, a short form of novel. So these are the examples. So these things I have just now discussed: growth of literacy, printing, public expansion, interest in daily life. I have circulated these slides with you. So these were the reasons for rise of novel. Okay, early novelist Daniel Defoe. And can you tell any famous work by Daniel Defoe? Anyone? Anyone? So a famous work is Robinson Crusoe. So this is about expedition, and there is something called, okay, the burden of white men, that they had some burden. White men has this. This is again a cultural, what to say. Maybe this is very much racial, but white man had this see to go in a far land, and they call it, making others more like civilized, civilize other people in other lands. But uh, in the name, in under beneath that veil, what they used to do is, just what to say, uh, oppress people in the other lands, in the name of civilizing them, and use them for their own benefit, maybe financial, maybe all those things. So Daniel Defoe kind of reflects that sentiments of white man's burden and expedition. So sometimes in expedition, when they used to go for the expedition through sea, by sea, because from England you'll go by sea, it's an island. So sometimes they used to fall into things like shipwreck, and they used to get shipwrecked and lost in an island. So this is about Robinson Crusoe and his experiences in a foreign land. Then there were writers like Samuel Richardson, Henry Fielding. So these were the first and foremost writers of novels, novel writers. Yeah. So Alexander Pope, I've given example. Jonathan Swift, there is a sentiment of there is a political sentiment in his writing as well. You might have heard story of Gulliver's Travel, or have seen in some modern adaptation of this piece of literature. So yeah, I'll talk about this later on in my next class. For today, we're stopping here. So, any question? Do you have any question around today's class? Anyone? Anyone? Do you have any question, Mr. Molson? Okay, so we are stopping the this thing recording, and we'll take another class. Uh, okay, because I have a class after 10 minutes. See you in next class. I hope it was a great, insightful class for you.